Be Strong, Be Wise?
Well, I have been a psychotherapist in practice for 25 years, and in the course of those years, I had primarily worked with victims of trauma. My work a lot with women, and of course, a lot of women have stories like these. And I'd studied trauma in grad school and was a child welfare social worker early in my career. And it wasn't until February of 2019, though, on the heels of the Me Too movement and the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, where I started noticing, and it was, of course, impossible not to, that there was a devastating aftermath for the women that I was working with, just emotional and, just this kind of despair almost over all the hope that had been building during the course of Me Too, and then having this hearing take place, which, for assault survivors was quite difficult to watch. So I began to work on an article responding to the effects of sexual violence, and especially on the developing brain, since most people who experience assault are in adolescence and young adulthood. They're still in that developmental process. So trauma can have a real significant effect on the brain development. So I was working on this article, and in the midst of that, my daughter, while volunteering in a church soup kitchen, was assaulted by one of the attendees. And it just wrecked me. And I realized that here I was, an expert in trauma, and I'd worked so many years in the field and had taken so many trainings, but it was always from the lens of response. And I began to just kind of turn the tables on my focus and started researching anything I could find around prevention. My daughter was preparing for college. I wanted to give her anything I could to support that transition. And what I found was so minuscule and, to my mind, didn't meet young people where they're at, with what they're exposed to on a daily basis, what their lives are like now. And so I just started realizing, I can do this. I can offer something from my experience, and I'm a survivor myself, and my daughter has bravely offered to share her story, which is in the book, and she's been one of the greatest supporters of this whole process. And anyway, so that's when I obsessively began doing my own research and writing around a protocol that could help keep young people safe.
And it's necessary, right? I mean, we're at epidemic proportions for sexual assault, harassment. Can you define those for us? I mean, both from like a clinical as well as a personal.
Sure. So, and this is something that I encourage people to talk about with young people. So the definition is much broader than people think. A lot of people still believe that sexual assault equates with rape, that it happens when you're walking down a street and somebody grabs you from a dark alley.
Right.
And honestly, that is so rarely, although those of course occur, they are by far the minority. And 70% of sexual assaults take place with a known offender. So it's supporting young people in understanding themselves in relationship differently and understanding peer pressure differently. But the three operative words in the legal definition are unwanted sexual touch. And what we do in the program is we help young people understand what that means to them, because everybody's different. Everybody has different boundaries. Everybody has different sensitivity around space, personal space. And another thing that the legal definition contains, which a lot of young people are still learning, is that, of course, consent is not properly given unless somebody is fully sober, fully healthy, not under the influence of any kind of compromising drug, or any kind of sickness. So these are some things that are perfect starting points for conversations with young people. Just the definition. Yeah.
And when you, just for further clarity, when you say mostly it's with a known sexual, but that, You had just said it was
Sorry.
by someone
The offender was known to the victim.
known to the victim, right?
Sorry,
It
not
wasn't
a known offender.
Right.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
Yeah, the offender was known to the victim at the time of assault in 70% of assault cases. Yeah.
That is so essential for people to understand that yes, rape does happen in those dark alleys.
Yes.
Yes, and there's ways to hopefully protect yourself to minimize the potential of that because it does happen.
Right.
But most of the time it happens with someone you know.
Yeah.
And because of that, there's so much complexity around it.
Yes.
And it becomes something we don't talk about.
Right.
So let's talk about it.
Yes. Thank you. I totally agree.
Yeah. How can, and a lot of this conversation will be geared towards women because the statistics are there to support. Women are the ones more likely to be in positions where they are being assaulted sexually.
Yeah.
So most of this conversation will frame around that, knowing that men are also have been victims as well.
Yes.
But so we'll focus on the women, knowing that it's not an exclusive club.
Right, and just as a side note, I recently read that 1 in 6 boys will report experiencing assault by the time they graduate high school.
Right.
And of course, harassment is at much higher numbers. 100% of women that were interviewed by Peggy Orenstein for her book, Girls and Sex, which is a New York Times bestseller. I encourage viewers to check it out. 100% of her interviewees reported harassment. So this is a subject that I think we need to start talking about as early as middle school. I mean, middle school boys and girls are checking out pornography sites at younger ages, as young as 10. So it really does apply to both sexes, but I agree it is an issue that is really, primarily affects women.
Right.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Talk to us about how women, young women, girls, can protect themselves.
Well, in the book and in the safety ed program, I say the word program a lot because we organized a program that correlates with the book and has a series of 5 classes that allow young people, boys and girls and non-binary folks, to begin to understand who they are in relationship to sexual safety. And when I say sexual safety, I'm not talking about condom use, I'm talking about sexual assault prevention. So we begin with a broad lens view of gender and culture, and then we narrow the lens in order to focus on individual self-knowledge. So what I think is a great opportunity for us as adults and as educators is to talk to young people about how their particular brain works, how their particular defense styles work. And even though they don't have executive functioning yet according to their physiological development, we can create reflective questions that help them begin to get a sense of, am I more of a fight type or a flight type or a freeze type? And in my practice, and I've heard countless stories of assault, the freeze factor is very significant.
Describe what that means.
So that's basically deer in the headlights reaction. You're in a moment of risk. There's something happening that is dangerous. You're probably getting some very clear red flag signals. The brain goes into overdrive. All of those danger hormones are shot forward from the lizard brain, and there's just this overwhelming shutdown. So the person literally can freeze. And this happens a lot more often than we know. And there's a way of breaking that pattern. The more that young people are aware of whether or not they are prone to that, and you could even give an example of, being in a classroom and a bossy teacher calling on you. Are you likely to kind of freeze, or are you likely to want to say something, or are you likely to want to leave the room? So just kind of creating these conversations and then developing a response that could be applicable to anything. And oftentimes just no or get me out of here or I'm leaving will of course suffice. But the freeze factor is significant and can linger, right? Longer than it should and create dangerous things happening. Yeah.
Yeah. So the goal is to get them to know themselves, understand how they react, and teach them ways that they can respond in a way to protect themselves, or respond in a way that will help them through many situations beyond a
Yeah.
danger situation.
Right, right. And in my classes, when I've taught young people, I'm always amazed at how, first of all, how eager they are to have these conversations. Because we're living in an age of massive duplicity. We know, the Me Too movement happened. Young people know what that is, at least at a bare bones level. And they know at least one person in their life, however indirectly or in the news, who has experienced assault, because it's just so much on the rise. Most high schools, for example, have had at least one incident over the course of the year. So here they are aware of that this thing is bad and wrong, and yet they're watching in the media and in pornography really violent sex, as if it was normal, as if it was pleasurable, and as if both men and women enjoyed it.
Right.
And a lot of adults don't realize that 88% of pornography videos contain violence against women in increasingly disturbing ways. And in all the videos, the women appear to like it. So while, again, young people are smart, they know, like, that's not real. But again, the longer the exposure, the more real it becomes, the more familiar it becomes. And so what young people are openly saying is, we don't, what are we supposed to do? Are you supposed to be provocative and sexy and rough and aggressive, or are you supposed to be the friendly, nice guy, or nice girl? Right. So, the mixed messages are pretty significant, and I think creating a lot of confusion and adding to the fact that it's a taboo subject.
Right.
We don't know how to talk about.
And it's confusing to all of our children, the boys, the girls, binary. I mean, it's just...
Yeah.
How do we, so where are the biggest challenges? I mean, obviously that is an enormous challenge to have some sort of a fair playing ground when it comes to having these conversations about sexuality, about appropriate behavior, and what consent actually is.
Right.
And which it isn't. She says no 4 times and then finally she gives in. So there's,
right.
But we don't talk about those things.
Right. And there's a lot of emphasis being put on this new sense of the affirmative yes. So that in it's not just consent is no is no. It's yes needs to be yes. In other words, at every stage of the intimacy progression, there needs to be an affirmation that this is okay. And young people are getting more familiar with that. Again, that's, of course, one angle of the prism, because all of this other concerning stuff is equally present. Sure. Rough sex, aggressive sex, women reporting that they feel responsible to pleasure the man. It's not about their own pleasure.
And that is not a new thing.
No, but pornography is really adding a whole nother layer to it. But as far as the challenges, I've mentioned a few. I think this taboo subject, aspect that creates a challenge with having the conversation, both for adults and for young people. All of the isms in our culture, sexism as alive and well as it ever was, and even victims in the Weinstein scandal reported feeling internalized misogyny come up through self-statements that were victim blaming. Like, I should never have opened the door. I should never have worn that outfit. I should never have had that extra drink. And I think we have to be really vigilant with victim blaming, because it's something that's so entrenched in our society in general. And then, of course, when you add assault to the mix, is much more likely to get turned on high volume. And survivors, in my experience, spend way too long living with the burden of guilt and shame when it was never their fault to begin with. Right. So I think that's a challenge. Racism, women of color are far more likely to be victims than Caucasian women.
Why is that?
I think discrimination. I think there's a sense that women of color are more racy, more sexually wild, or there's just stereotypes we have around sex and race that aren't necessarily true.
Interesting. And so statistically, who's perpetuating those assaults on Black women?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think that there's one type of offender, if that's what you're asking.
No, I'd just be really curious. Is it close family? Is it the expectation of other Black men? Like, I'm just trying to get an idea of like what is that perfect storm that is created.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, when I read about that, and again, I read that stat in Peggy Orenstein's book, Girls and Sex, and she didn't describe who the offenders primarily were. I think it's across the board, as with any demographic. It's the offenders are across the board.
Absolutely.
So, and then of course homophobia and transgender folks are much more at risk.
And socioeconomic as well. If you, not that precludes that if you are in a high income bracket that does not happen, but in a lower income bracket, the statistics also tend to point that you're at a higher risk. What can, again, not blaming the victim ever, but what can, once you identify, what your response likely is, and once you know that, wow, I might be in a higher risk geographic location or whatever would place you in that higher risk, what can someone do to help protect themselves or keep themselves safe without living in fear? Because that's the other thing we want to combat is we don't want to walk around living in fear, but we want to be strong, be wise.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
Yeah. So I love that question. That's one of the focal points of the program, and one of our mandates is to help young people be informed, not afraid. And so when we start the program, we talk about, the demographics or the statistics are still in your favor, that it's more likely you will not experience assault than that you will. But we're here to better the odds. And of course, as far as harassment, there's a number of relationship scenarios and professional scenarios where especially women, are experiencing very uncomfortable scenarios that we've come to understand as almost normal. And I think the Me Too movement has really propelled us forward to a new understanding of how to respect women's boundaries, how to understand an equitable environment in the workplace. But to speak to your question, I think it starts with conversations, a lot of conversations, starting with, the definition of sexual assault, helping people understand what does unwanted sexual touch mean to them. What are the red flag signals that you get from your gut when you're in an uncomfortable situation? Everybody is able to identify a time or place when they felt that. So beginning to build that sense of intuition. And then, of course, the communication style. So knowing what do you say when you're uncomfortable. And in classes, again, what I've been amazed at is that young people know when they're uncomfortable. They don't always know what to say. And so literally having a sentence or a phrase that young people can identify for themselves. This is what I would say. And then practicing it. Again, because so many offenders are known to the victim, it's a great opportunity to let young people practice healthy boundaries, to be able to speak out, especially our young women, to speak out when they're uncomfortable. In the book, we talk about a phenomena that I call the good girl conditioning.
Oh, yes.
And we all know what that is. But, it's alive and well. Young women are still falling prey to the sense that they're supposed to be nice. Well, I couldn't say that, I would hurt their feelings. All of this kind of stuff that is not as present with boys, although boys sometimes say the same thing. Like, I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Yeah. And this is why, again, one of our goals is creating a language for sexual safety so it's normal.
And you teach this in middle schools? Like, is this a program that's available for children at that age?
It certainly is. We've taught the program now at the high school level and at the college level, but it's applicable to any young person, regardless of life experience or maturity level or class, race, because it's about personal awareness. It's about some of the aspects of humanity that are true for all of us and how we can just get a better sense of those in order to have healthier relationships. Yeah.
You talk about safety tools in your book. Do you count intuition as one of those safety tools? Yeah. What else is included in that? Not to give away the whole book.
Right. So we have 5 primary tools, and again, one of our our statements that we say a lot is, the tools are not something you carry in a backpack or a purse. The most important tools that we possess are inside of us. Communication's one. I've already talked a lot about that. Intuition is one of our most important ones. Affect manipulation is another tool, and we do a lot of role plays around this one. So it's basically looking tough even when you feel scared. So getting the language that you might use, that kind of, bravado, again, this could apply to men or women, how you would carry yourself if you wanted to come across as a lot more confident and a lot more fierce than you may feel in the moment. Communication and people perception. So, and a lot of times, these tools can be applied, several at the same time. And what we do in the program is we have long conversations around what they are and explain them, but then apply them to relationships. So we give a bunch of scenarios. What tools would you use here, and how would you apply them? And all of that. But, the focus, I think, is important to start in a really broad fashion so that young people understand some of the cultural forces like pornography and the media, and then begin to narrow the scope. We talk about peer pressure and the party scene. Alcohol is the number one variable. 63% of offenders were under the influence at the time, 50% of victims. So helping young people develop what I call a code of conduct, which is not to say you can't go out and party, because young people will party. We need to suspend judgment and just recognize that's part of that life stage, is to go out and have fun and be free. But there's a way of enjoying independence and still being safe. So just having certain kind of benchmarks in place, certain guidelines that just help people have fun, but also stay on the winning side of safety and lower the risk variables.
So we've talked a lot, necessarily so, about how the individual can help keep themselves safe. What about parents and other adults that care about our kids? Like, how do they factor into all this?
Great question. So I'm actually in the process of writing my second book in the Be Strong, Be Wise series that's going to be geared toward caring adults. Could be parents, could be teachers, counselors, youth workers, coaches, anybody who works with young people. Because these are the folks that are able to provide the curriculum, are able to have the kinds of conversations with young people that support safety and make this a more normal conversation. So we're basically giving the same guidelines, but creating, again, an atmosphere and a kind of progression that makes it easier, because it is a fear-based topic. It is something that people shy away from. So again, I think that parents are wise to maybe do a little bit of their own personal inventory. This applies to any caring adult. What are your own experiences with unwanted sexual touch? How have those experiences affected you? This is wise anyway, whether or not you have a young person in your life that you want to have the conversation with. It's good just to get a sense of what your own life has been like in regards to the issue. And then, are you comfortable sharing any of that with your young people? This is how young people learn. They're hungry to talk to the people in their life that have already lived it. And again, you don't have to talk about your personal experience, but if you're comfortable, it just widens the door of conversation even more and creates a richer process. But again, I think beginning with the definition, talking about unwanted sexual touch, talking about experiences and intuition and red flag signals, talking about what a young person would say, and then, bringing in some of these safety tools. And I'm kind of talking quickly about all of these steps that you could spend hours on any one of them.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think what's most helpful is to have short conversations that are not super intense or super lengthy, but just kind of give like little allotments of connection and safety and objective observation, so that it's not about judging what young people are doing or not doing, because that's just going to create shutdown, but acknowledging what they're exposed to and asking them, what do they think about it? How do they want to respond to it? And continuing that conversation in an ever deepening way over time.
Wonderful. Well, where can people find out more information about you, about your book?
So my website is the same title as the book, so bestrongbewise.com, and I can be reached at amy@bestrongbewise.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions that viewers have, and I'm happy, obviously, to talk about this issue and to talk about the book. So people are welcome to get a hold of me.
Well, thank you so much for being on the
welcome.
show. If you have one challenge for viewers, what would it be?
Oh, I think to try and get comfortable with the uncomfortable. You know, this is an issue that's been around since the dawn of the species, and yet we've come not far enough in doing anything about it. So I don't think we can wait till we're comfortable, because we'll never have the conversation, but just dance with that discomfort a little bit, take baby steps. Even if your young person just kind of shrugs or rolls their eyes, you're still giving them something to think about. You're
really
still
valuable.
planting a seed for them to be out in the world at the next party when somebody's drinking too much and getting in their space. They're going to think about things differently the more that we have these conversations. So,
Well, thank you for having this conversation with me today.
you're so
We're out of
welcome.
time.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a huge pleasure.
It's a delight having you here.
Thank you.